which leads me into our next portion of the podcast, which is the NFL. And I'm going to move through this as quick as I can. But listen, the first thing, this is a tough time of year for a guy like me, born in 1985. I had Nolan run some numbers for me to see what I would have gotten paid in 2011 if it were today. And this is Nolan's exact writing. Now, Nolan used to work in an NFL building. Okay, so Chris Long, born too early. In 2011, contract year, it was a year early. They read me up a year early. I had 13 sacks and 15 TFLs. I think I led the league in pressures too, but those aren't a real stat depending on who you talk to. Call it a money play score of 28 is what he says. In 2023, Brian Burns, who turns 26 in April, had 8 sacks and 16 TFLs, a 24 on our money plays metric. He just got paid following a trade to New York, 5 years, 141 mil, 28.2 APY, 87.5 total guaranteed. And 23, Montez Sweat, who turns 28 in December, had 12.5 sacks, 14 TFLs, 26.5 money plays, just got paid. 98 mil max, 24.5 APY, 72.9. I don't even want to compare myself to Hunter. He's just an alien. But this is what Nolan had to say. So given age and production comps, think the Burns Sweat deals are good proxies. You hadn't missed the game in 4 years. So I'll figure at least a 4-year deal. If we just loosely average those deals, I'd say 4 years, 120 mil max. Oof. 26.5 APY, 80 mil guaranteed. The deal I got, 4 years, 48.2 million, 12.05 APY, and 23.5 guaranteed. Okay, so I just want to say this. I'm not complaining. You know, we talk about this all the time. Dudes that are a little bit older, looking back at guys that played their position or are seeing the flooding of cash that comes with the passage of time in the NFL and the salary cap going up. You know, a lot of them could be mad. But I don't get mad because I remember looking in the rear view at guys that didn't get paid anywhere near as much as us, and who built the league, man, like guys that missed that window where it really turned into a cash cow, and I always felt for those guys. So I'm certainly not going to look at one of these guys and side eye them. This is the market now. This is the way the cap's gone. This is the way it's good for everybody. All this money going to these players is a positive sign for anybody involved with football, whether it's a podcaster, you know, or a media member that's on TV. Like, we're getting paid more because there's more money to go around. So life is good, and these guys deserve it. And listen, that deal changed my life. You know, the pre-CBA top 5 pick money changed my life. This changed it on top of that. So I'm not complaining, but had I signed a deal like Brian Burns, you could kiss this shit goodbye. I'd have never met you motherfuckers, okay? I wouldn't be doing podcasting. All right, so let me run through this. It is a painful time of year. It's also an interesting time of year because these players, they play different positions. I got a call from somebody yesterday that was wondering, hey, Chris, like, what should I tell this guard? Should he be patient, or should he be chasing teams down, trying to get some buzz going in free agency? Well, look at the draft class. Like, look at the guard draft class. Like, I think more than anything, when you're a free agent, you think when you watch that first wave of free agents, it can be like demoralizing if you're not a first tier guy. Like, later in my career, when I was finally a free agent, I was not a first tier guy. I don't even know if I was second wave of free agency guy. I can remember being on the mountain at 15,000 feet with a sat phone at Kilimanjaro, calling home every day to my agent to see if anybody called. They didn't. Okay, so I brought that sat phone for nothing. I got home, and it took a while, and I signed with the Eagles. But, like, if, for instance, this is a tweet from Bill Colarulo, or I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, buddy, but it was a good tweet. And he's talking about the Eagles. If you're a fan of a team, don't expect them to do all their work in the first phase, okay? Like, our championship season, Patrick Robinson and I came a month into free agency. LeGarrette Blount, May 17th. Timmy Jernigan in April. Darby in August, who, by the way, got paid $10 million. He's still making money. Bradbury, their second Super Bowl year where they lost to the Chiefs, May 18th. A.J. Brown in April. C.J. Gardner-Johnson in August. So this stuff happens. You know, it takes time to build out a truly winning roster. And so like some of the people listening to this podcast are lamenting the fact that their team's not the most involved yet. Some of the most key signings happen later, and they happen under the radar. I'm sure when those signings happen, like with Patrick Robinson or myself, most people weren't thinking like, oh, these are going to be game-changing signings. But like when you add veterans and you add role-playing pieces, like these are the differences sometimes in you winning the whole thing and you not. I'll give you an example. The Chiefs. Okay, they're not making a lot of news, although I think with OBJ getting released today, those edits of him wearing the Kansas City colors look amazing. I think people look at his year last year in Baltimore and say, oh, well, he's washed and that sort of thing. I also don't think they used him right. I don't think they used him enough. I don't think him and the OC were on the same page. I also think some people might think, Odell's won a ring. He's probably chasing money. But he takes pride in his game. And, if people are calling him washed, one way to get dried off, so to speak, is to go play for Andy Reid and catch balls from Patrick Mahomes. Okay, and so I don't know that he'd be looking for the same amount of money he'd be looking for to go play for, I don't know, the Arizona Cardinals. When you're talking about the Chiefs, the way that they've made some news is because of that unique contract that Patrick signed, they've been able to convert roster bonuses to signing bonuses. They did it last year, $12 million that they converted, and they saved $9 million. Okay, so talking about what I was just referring to, that's the money they used on Drew Tranquill and Mike Edwards. They don't win the Super Bowl if not for those guys. They aren't stars, but they're big pieces that had to play big roles in spots when guys were down. And these can be the difference between going to the divisional round and the Super Bowl. So, like this year, they converted $27 million of his salary, and it frees up $21 million. They were 5 over the cap. They signed Chris Jones to a 5-year, $158 million deal. They franchised Snead. If they trade Snead, they save $19 million. Supposedly, they're talking to Indy. They could go after a veteran wide receiver or a left tackle with that money. There's still some tackles out there. Tyron Smith, Donovan Smith, who obviously they know, Dwayne Brown, David Bakhtiari, who's been a great player. They have Wanya Morris. One thing that I think flew under the radar with the Chiefs is the loss of Willie Gay. Like, how do you replace his range? I think he complemented Nick Bolton so well, and when they didn't have him, they did not look the same. So that's one question mark for me with the Chiefs. But I use the Chiefs as an example of, like, sometimes you think when you're freeing up all this cap space, it could be for one big signing, but a lot of times you're signing the role players that fill the cracks in your roster and can make the difference between winning the whole thing or just being in the playoffs. Maybe they can stick the landing on an OBJ and the role players they need. Get to work Brett Veach. Talking about the Ravens, man, the obvious big news is Derrick Henry signing a 2-year deal for $16 million with 9 guaranteed and 4 in bonuses. Okay, they flirted with him at the deadline 6 months ago, if you remember that. Now they don't have to give anything up to get him other than money. They're losing Edwards to the Chargers. Dobbins and Cook, free agents. They do have Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell was great last year, obviously got hurt late in the season, so you're going to start the season without him. And the way they're talking about him, he'll be back in 24, goes to show how long a road that's going to be. They also have Justice Hill, who I'm a big fan of, but neither of these guys are like low red threats, short yardage guys, every down backs in a traditional sense. They probably should carry one more power back. That's a lot of eggs in the basket of Derrick Henry. I mean, obviously, people are waiting for him to burn out every year. I've been waiting for it. He's turning 30. That's a marker for a normal running back. But is this guy normal? The Ravens don't think so. So far, the norms have not applied to him.
He has run into 120-plus more 8-man boxes than the next running back of the last 3 years. That jump to Baltimore is going to be huge.
Yeah.
Because his offensive line is a lot different.
A lot better, especially than the group that he played behind last year.
Yes.
I mean, that had to be the worst group he ever played behind. And so, like, the norms don't necessarily apply to him. He's a 2,000 carry guy in the pros. Now, one thing people don't remember is at Bama, he had 1 year where he carried a heavy load, but largely he wasn't like the feature back for 4 years. So like how much he didn't come in the league as like 100,000 mile Ford Ranger. Like this guy had some mileage that you could get out of him, and he's never seemed to burn out. He had a foot injury a year ago, but like last year, reasonable load by his standards, ended up with 1,000 yards. And he did that quietly, and he did that in a bad situation. And when he gets in the open field, it never ceases to amaze me. The Ravens game last year, coincidentally, in London, when he got out in the open field, I was like, holy shit, that's Derrick fucking Henry. That's Derrick Henry. He's the same guy. So if you're using him less, I think that bodes well for Baltimore this year. I think he's got some gas in the tank, and, he can help him in the screen game. I think, that power element with the speed that they have on the field could put people in a bind. They've only had one 1,000-yard rusher since Lamar started out, and that was Ingram in 2019. So this is unprecedented to have a star like this in the backfield. They need to use him more than they used OBJ, and I think they will. He may not be going in division like some of these other guys, like Saquon Barkley, but he did beat up on the Ravens in the playoffs, and this has turned into a rivalry.
He also has 90 touchdowns, 8 seasons. It's going to help them a ton in the red zone. For them to be able to punch it in.
And they have
pressure off Lamar.
And they have more leads than anybody. They played with more leads than anybody last year. This is going to help them park the car in the garage, right? Ravens did lose like 5 to 6 players the first 24 hours of free agency. Queen to Pittsburgh, Simpson and Moses to New York, Geno Stone to Cincinnati. Lamar was joking. He's not dead to him. He was fucking around. Edwards to the Chargers, Duvernay and Darby to Jacksonville. Lots of running back movement, and I think it really comes down to the running back class not being that great. The combination of that and the fact that the cap is up, you're going to be like, oh, they're paying running backs more than ever. Well, relatively speaking, not really. The cap's just up, and I think it's a weak draft class, relatively speaking. So you get Aaron Jones of the Vikings, another interdivision kind of deal, which Green Bay and Minnesota have swapped players over the years, and some of the more so than other division pairings. You've seen guys play for both those teams, and most famously Brett Favre, but it's not just him. I guess they lowballed him a little bit with a $4 million offer, and he looked really good last year, but there is the injury concern. There's age. They said no thanks. They go with Josh Jacobs. I don't know how you replace him catching the ball out of the backfield. We'll see what they do there, but he got 6 from division rival and took it. And you've got Greg Roman reuniting with Gus Edwards. The Bears add DeAndre Swift, and so on. Fields was the Bears' leading rusher. So, while you have 3 running backs and you don't know what you're going to do with all of them, this can't hurt. The 2 teams we just talked about are AFC elites. Like, that's why I'm leading with them. Houston is a team that I would like to include in that category because I think the window's wide open. If you had to ask me today who's the biggest threat to Kansas City in the AFC next year, I might say Houston. I really might say Houston. Not Baltimore. I might say Houston. And I love what they're doing. They lost Grenard, who I thought had a great year. Super underrated, but they upgraded with Danielle Hunter, who I think is fantastic. They lost Rankins, who I love, but man, do I love Danico Autry. I'm one of his biggest fans in the media. They lost Singletary, who I love. Okay, somebody asked me who's underrated in the NFL the other night. He's a perfect example. But they gained a 27-year-old Joe Mixon coming off a 1,000-yard season. These are all teams with quarterbacks. Another team with a quarterback is the Buffalo Bills, but their window is closing. They're going to have to nail it in the draft. They lost 6 starters. Mitch Morse, they lost Davis, they lost Floyd, they lost Poyer, they lost White, they lost Dane Jackson, and they're really going to have to nail the draft picks. I think Poyer is a huge loss for them with what they ask of their safeties, and Morse is a tough one as well because of the fact that he's been the guy who Josh Allen's been he's had his hands under his balls for a number of years. That's a
good point because 2 of those losses directly affect Josh Allen.
Exactly.
Mitch and Gabe Davis.
Exactly. And Gabe Davis is a big one. Although he couldn't really turn the corner, they got to find a viable number 2 there. And so the Floyd deal's tough because now, who's your guy outside? Von Miller wasn't that great last year, and they bring back Epinesa, but who's your home run hitter? I don't know. Every team we just talked about has a quarterback. I want to get on the teams that don't. Chicago's obviously one that has made the most news, but we laid every scenario out this fall. One scenario we laid out was keeping Fields and drafting a quarterback, and also the scenario where you could keep Fields, draft a quarterback, and trade him mid-season because you're always going to get more in that situation. And I think Kyle brought that up this week and made some waves. Actually, First Take picked it up, and Stephen A. Smith gave us our flowers for having joined us in Austin and enjoyed the show. I loved having Stephen A. on. I know some people don't like Stephen A., but I think watching him deliver a monologue is like watching Barry Bonds hit a baseball. Okay, in Pittsburgh or in big head Barry Bonds or small head Barry Bonds. It doesn't matter to me. I think Stephen A is that awesome. But the whole point is, Kyle brought this up where he's like, listen, you're not getting what you thought you'd get, so draft a quarterback if that's what you want to do and keep Fields and see what happens. And seeing his trade value right now, I can't argue with that.
His trade value, it can only go up in season.
It can only go up.
Kyle
and
described it as Y plus 5.
Y plus 5. He's a math guy. But I couldn't help noticing something this week, just as an aside. Like Justin Fields didn't come in the league with anything. He came in the league with a big contract and big expectations, but they failed him organizationally in the first couple of years of his career. Even last year, the cupboard's a little more bare than you think it is. 33rd team put out a graphic and it said, this is what Caleb Williams might be working with next year. It's quarterback Caleb Williams, running back DeAndre Swift, Herbert, Johnson, wide receiver DJ Moore, wide receiver Odunze if they draft somebody like Rome Odunze from Washington, tight end Cole Kmet. That is a fucking squad right there, dude. If you nail the wide receiver pick, you could have a really nice situation for a rookie quarterback to come into. And I just say that to bring up the point that, like, we'll never know how Justin Fields would have done in a situation like that. It's too late. We're too far down the road. But that is a huge juxtaposition relative to what he had to work with. And so I am a buyer in the Justin Fields stock. If you want to take a shot and you want to make a move where the ceiling's a little higher, the risk is high, but so is the reward. I think Justin Fields has got good football ahead of him. Atlanta's one of the places we thought he might end up, but Kirk Cousins wins again, dude. This guy is a business All-American, but I want to show him some respect because I think a lot of people have like memified this guy over the years, like just kind of goofy, poorly dressed, depending on the way you think about it. I think he dresses great. My closet probably looks a lot like his. Hasn't won a lot of big games, but there's a lot of quarterbacks who haven't, man. And we've called Lamar Jackson's playoff record into question. But Kirk Cousins is an easy target, right? And I think people sometimes will forego really looking at his body of work and watching him play football to join into the narrative. I think if you're a team in quarterback purgatory and you can't draft and you got to go hit the free agency market, this is about as good an outcome as you could have. This is a franchise quarterback. Now, he's coming off an Achilles. I worry about them, his mobility and maybe what he looks like coming off that injury, but he gives them a chance to win. I think they can win that division with him. They've got weapons outside, and they can move the pocket. They really can. And adding Mooney there is great. We always bring up the Brandon Staley last dance rant about, we need Pippen, we need Jordan, we need our wide receiving core to look like the Bulls. And that sounded good, but he forgot Steve Kerr, he forgot all the little guys and the man beaters, and I think Mooney is a different body type from the guys they have. So when you're in a man beater situation, you want to put somebody in a bunch or a stack. He's the type of guy that you want to have. And I think also Kirk Cousins, and this isn't lost on me, the division he plays in, Dennis Allen, Todd Bowles, like they're going to dial it up and they're going to bring the blitz. Like you want a veteran quarterback in that situation. And he's seen everything there is to see. So I'm not saying he's a world beater, but you got to show this guy some respect. And I think you're going to have to show the Falcons some respect this year.
And the Desmond Ridder era is officially over, traded today for Rondale Moore.
Rare player-for-player trade, but he's got a lot of weapons at his disposal there in Atlanta, including Bijan Robinson, who I think is fantastic. Okay, so the Steelers, they had Russell Wilson. I don't want to read too much into what they want to do with Russell Wilson. I think if Russell Wilson's there for $1 million and you think he can be a quality piece to compete with Kenny Pickett or that sort of thing, I don't think you're necessarily giving up on Kenny Pickett, but I think there should be a competition there. And I also think it might say something about the Fields thing, like the speed with which Pittsburgh moved to get Russell signed up was maybe an indication that the asking price was too high on Fields or that Poles is staying with him. And, I think we think because the media says certain things or the sources or like oftentimes ahead of the draft, you don't believe what you hear. You actually believe the opposite because people control information and they disseminate it in a way that's going to be beneficial to them. So we'll see what the Field situation shakes out as. But in Pittsburgh, I loved seeing the memes of Russell Wilson joining the Steelers. My favorite one was Zoolander, Ben Stiller prancing through the coal mine and they said this was Russell Wilson's first day at the office in Pittsburgh. I thought it was hilarious.
George Pickens is either going to have 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns, or he's going to be standing next to Russ's locker like he stood in front of the TV on draft night.
That's going to be an interesting relationship to
There's
keep an eye
no
on.
middle.
Yeah. Now here I have a theory real quick just to hit you on before we stop talking about Russ. I'm kind of being serious here. Okay, Dallas is up shit's creek because we know Dak's got him by the balls, and they're trying to figure out a way that they can pay him, and have some flexibility. There's no flexibility. The guy has a no trade clause. That's what kills you, right? Because you would have traded him by now probably. I mean, depending on how you think Jerry feels about this, because he kept McCarthy. There has to be some admission in that action that he's saying it's not McCarthy. It might be the quarterback. Do you remember how Dak acted when Trey Lance showed up? Like it was like Joe Montana got signed, right? Can you imagine if I were the Cowboys and I want to get rid of Dak, I'm kind of being serious here. I would have signed Russell Wilson for $1 million. Can you imagine what that really might have worked? Dak would have said, fuck this shit, I'm out, dude.
Solve the cap issues.
Yeah, I mean, so they missed that opportunity. I know some people are going to say it's ridiculous, but if you wanted Dak gone, you could make Dak want to be gone. Darnold in Minnesota, I'm really excited about this. I said this after the Ravens game. I liken it to the Baker Mayfield situation where Baker's kind of disgraced, and obviously Darnold didn't have the heights that Baker had in Cleveland. Baker won a fucking playoff game in Cleveland. You know how I feel about Baker. But it was McVay giving him an opportunity at the end of the season to get some snaps. That's a huge cosign to have a guy like that be like, yeah, he's good enough to play for my team, and I want to see what he's got. Same thing with Shanahan. You spend a year with Shanahan. If you're a sponge, that's going to make you better. Not only that, but you see how they operate. And you learn things. And, he got some snaps in that Ravens game. I said this last year. When Darnold and the Niners hosted the Bengals last year, I think Brock Purdy was banged up. And if Darnold had started that game, I might have felt like they had the same chance to win. I believe in him for some reason. Because I really think the guy's got something to him. You tell me who's played well in New York for the Jets with Adam Gase. You tell me who's played well in Carolina. Okay? I'm sorry, but not everybody's C.J. Stroud. There's something between C.J. Stroud and Josh Rosen. And a lot of the times we discount the context with which somebody comes in the league. This guy Darnold's had it tough. Now, I know nobody's going to feel bad for a rich young kid that got everything handed to him in their eyes, but I think he can play, and I love Kevin O'Connell, and I know the deal that they signed doesn't mean there's not going to be another quarterback on the roster, but I'd love to see him get another opportunity, man. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, as we get to talking about the NFC East, I think the Giants are going to make a move for a quarterback in the draft, and I think it could be Drake May. That's just my 2 cents. Okay. Looking at the NFC East, the Eagles stole the show, right? We talked about Brian Burns earlier. That's exciting. Him and Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence and all that stuff. That's exciting. It also, as a sidebar, is a reminder at how incompetent the Carolina Panthers have been. If you compare, I was on Dominique Foxworth's show the other day. Dom's the best. I love that guy. His co-host brought up, side by side, everything that they've gotten over the last couple of years and everything they've traded away. It is insane. And I said this when LA tried to send over multiple ones for Brian Burns. Number one, LA should be thanking their lucky stars that trade wasn't accepted, because I think that would have hurt them. But also, Carolina had to be the biggest bunch of dummies for not pulling the trigger on that trade, and now they send them up to New York for 2 and a 5. Multiple ones, a couple years later, 2 and a 5. Where did Carolina go over the last couple of years? Did he help you guys? They are not an organization that I would be excited about playing for, okay? The Eagles are taking shots, man. That's what they do. That's what Howie Roseman does. He's always going to try to do something outside the box, whether it's drafting Jalen Hurts or going, the other way on his investment in a linebacker, or in this case, going the other way on investing in a running back, because that's something he hasn't done in Philly. We won the Super Bowl with guys that weren't making a lot of money. They've stuck with that kind of model. I think that's more of a football in general model. But right now, I think from a football standpoint, bringing him in will help the Eagles, because I don't know how the O-line is going to be next year. I know how Lane Johnson is going to be. I know how Mailata is going to be. I don't know where Jurgens is going to end up. I don't know how certain guys are going to play inside with Kelsey gone. That's a big deal, dude. Like, they might be a very good unit, but that was a different kind of unit they've had the past couple of years. So what do? You say, well, we need a guy that can break some tackles. We need a guy who can get the ball out of the backfield too. And I think he's going to help. And I think for him, people's talents get wasted all the time in the NFL. We just talked about Sam Darnold. I'm not saying Sam Darnold is Saquon Barkley. The first time I ever saw Saquon Barkley play, I felt like I was in an EA Sports commercial. I ended up on the wrong side of a screen. It was his rookie year. I'm chasing him. I have no idea where the right angle is to chase this guy. I've never seen a guy drop so many people in the open field as he did. I was watching all my teammates end up on a highlight video, like in real time, right in front of me. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this guy is special with a capital S. And for a running back, that clock ticks a little bit faster. And so I hate watching a guy rot away in a place like New York. And, as for Tiki's comments, which, like, I don't want to take him out of context. I don't think he was saying, like, hey, fuck you, Saquon. I think he was like, you're dead to me, bro. Like, he was kind of being dismissive. But for a guy that used to play his position, I'm a Tiki fan. He's a Virginia guy. He's a buddy of mine, all that stuff. Like, the business, man. You wouldn't be in this situation, New York, if you just paid the guy. You could afford this deal. You didn't do it. And as a reminder to fans in Philly, you've done this too. Okay, when Jason Peters, who was not as good as Saquon Barkley when he just walked out of the building and drove down to Philly to sign his new deal, went to play for Dallas because he didn't have any other options, people were like, he's dead to me. I thought that was bullshit. And I think it's bullshit because you've already proved that that's not how you feel, because Deshaun Jackson, for instance, went to play for the then Redskins, and he was just welcomed home to retire, basically, by Eagles fans. So I never understand this thing. It's a business both ways. And I think Howie's always going to deviate a little bit from what you think the norm is. I wish he had deviated and paid Frankie Louvu from Carolina. I think they really could use linebacker help this year. Maybe they're going to attack in the draft. I also think the Commanders, by the way, have done as good a job low-key as anybody. Jeremy Chin, Dorrance Armstrong, who they'll probably use like a Michael Bennett. That's Dan Quinn's thing. He wants a guy that can swing inside and outside. That's the reason I didn't sign with the Falcons, because he was like, I want you to be my Michael Bennett. And I was like, that sounds like a great compliment, but no thank you. So I went up to New England to play 3 technique. Ertz, Wagner, great vets, guys that know how to win. Even Cleveland Farrell, who just got to be a part of a Super Bowl team. So I think the Commanders are doing a good job. Back to the Eagles. The Huff move really caught my eye. I landed from Austin, and there were 2 headlines. It was Saquon and Huff, and I was just excited about Huff because I've watched Huff all year and talked about him a lot on this podcast. I don't know if anybody talks about Bryce Huff more than we do. They're paying him $15-20. That's the only thing that I'm not sure about for a guy that played 28% run snaps last year. Like, how would you feel if they'd have paid me $10 million? Because it's kind of the same role. Now, I'm not saying I'm Bryce Huff, but he's a hell of a rusher. He's one of my favorite rushers in the league, super underrated. He's just constant action, constant movement. I think maybe that Zach Bond signing tells you that they want to use him like, a versatile guy who can play on ball, off ball, Van Ginkel kind of guy, right? Maybe you can split the snaps first and second and third down between those guys. But the question remains, what are they going to do with Sweat and Reddick? And I'd keep Sweat. I really would. I mean, he's cheaper. He's better in the run game. The last thing is C.J. Gardner-Johnson. When I was doing Gio's podcast the other day, my main man Giovanni, you got to check his podcast out if you can. I've seen this guy grow up in the industry. It's so fun to watch him, kind of like he's a serious media member now. He's almost graduated high school. Anyways, Philly fans know Gio. This CJ news hadn't dropped yet, and he asked me who they should be targeting, and I said I would address the secondary first. I would address secondary first because that snowball effect last year started with the nickel position, and I also think that group was missing dogs, and I mean like dogs, like guys that make you want to play a little nastier, guys that are shit disturbers. My favorite thing about C.J. Gardner-Johnson is he led the league in getting people to snatch his chain a couple years ago. Like, that's what he's about. He's an antagonist. He plays tough. He's rangy. He's physical. I just like his game, man. And, he said a year ago, Philly fans suck. I hate Philadelphia. Well, he went and got the bag in Detroit, saw how the other half's living. I'm not saying he didn't like Detroit, but now he gets the bag again with the Eagles. So good for the Eagles. Good for C.J. Gardner-Johnson.